Alright, geeks and ghouls, I know what you're thinking. You saw the title and you're like, what did Lovecraft do to get blacklisted? Did he said something racist on 1920s Twitter and he got backlash for this? No, it's another story. I'd say it's a funnier story, but it's not funny, and it's not by Howard Phillips Lovecraft. It's not something Lovecraft did that got him blacklisted, according, of course, to some people, because it's not exactly verified in a way. Today we'll talk about the story The Loved Dead by Clifford Martin Eddy Jr., who was a horror author from Providence as Lovecraft. They were real-life acquaintances, and they work together. They talk a lot. They had walks together. Eddie's wife was typing a lot of Lovecraft's stories, and he was also publishing his work in Weird Tales, among other magazines of the early 20s. This story I'm going to talk to you about was published in May 1924 in Weird Tales, and this issue was recalled because of how extreme the story was. So you probably wonder, why did he write and where does Lovecraft come in? Well, The Loved Dead is the story of a very Lovecraftian protagonist. Actually, it reminded me a lot of the way Lovecraft used to write. There is this protagonist who is an hermit, middle class, well-off person that's lonely and weird and misunderstood, and it's in first person as sort of a memoir. So yeah, I can see the similarities to Lovecraft. I'm not sure that many people wrote this way back then. He was always the pariah, and on the funeral of his grandfather, he felt a strange stirring inside him, and when his mother died and she was buried, he was fascinated by this, and he started to realize that he had a very strong fascination with the dead. So he becomes a mortician's apprentice, and then moves to another town nearby his hometown, where he gets to work as a mortician's assistant. He lives inside the mortuary, and he is sating himself on his fascination with the dead. And when people don't die, he goes out and he kills people to feel something. And alright, he's a necrophile, alright? But it's a 1924 story. It was a story published a century ago, so it doesn't go into dirty details. It never becomes necromantic or something, alright? The way he deals with the dead is described in a very vague way. The most it goes is that at some point the owner of the mortician of the town is going early into the mortuary and finds his apprentice, the protagonist, sleeping, embracing a corpse which is melting. So he's kicked out and he starts traveling around, working in certain mortuaries. At some point he returns to town, the second town he lived in, and he also becomes a mortician there. But soon he starts murdering people. He's found by the police, and so he ends up in a cemetery and kills himself to escape getting caught. So yeah, overall, in our day and age, it's a very tame story, because we have read splatterpunk and a lot of sick stuff, and we're like, yeah, that thing is very weak sauce. But back then, it was an outrageous scandal to read a story like that. Some moral authorities were like, you should ban this book, and that there was a confiscation of books was recalled, but also it sold like crazy. But the whole scandal meant that Mr. Eddy Jr. would undergo much more scrutiny when he submitted stories to Weird Tales. And also, his very good friend Howard Phillips Lovecraft, who may have helped edit or rewrite this story, was also under scrutiny. So While Lovecraft was not technically blacklisted, the historian Eddy Jr, who is a very famed historian about Lovecraft's life, says that yeah, they had to, to comb their works for explicitly gruesome passages. The love dead, and that meant that a lot of Howard Phillips Lovecraft stories were not tame. By the way, Lovecraft has written some awful Satan stories about cannibalism, about I guess some sort of bestiality in a way. Yet his racism was not the most horrific things in his stories, believe me, but it was pretty bad. They were rejected because of how extreme they were, and Lovecraft was not like, he was not caring about selling stories. He was like, I'll just write for the art of writing and write extreme stuff. So yeah, that's the whole story. And Clifford Martin Eddy Jr. had a long career. He died in the 70s. He became a theatrical booking agent and was actually elected for certain public offices in his lifetime. So yes, while Howard Phillips Lovecraft died poor and very young, he lived and he was accepted by his peers, despite having written a story that created a moral outrage, allegedly, because some historians say that yes, alright, it was kind of shocking, but not in the way it's portrayed later on. So yeah, that's The Love Dead, a weird artifact from the 30s, from the 20s, quite extreme for its age, I guess, but very tasteful. So your inner gorehound will probably won't appreciate the story. I've read this in an old Greek pulp book from, I don't know, the 80s. Yes, it was published in 1984. The translator is like, I don't believe I've read this. I left a sigh of relief when I finished it. I mean, yes, alright, it was 1984. Splatterpunk was the starting back then, so you understand that. And at the same time, we have this Clive Barker fellow we talked about yesterday. So yeah, that's how it is. So yes, enough rambling about it. Yes, some of those stories unfortunately don't have as much to say as I hoped for, but well, maybe tomorrow we'll have something much juicier. But until then, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and stay spooky. Thank you for watching.